Hi everyone, we're just waiting to see if more people are going to show up, so we'll get started in a few minutes. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming out in this cold, cold night. I'm Hope Herzog. I'm the College and Career Coordinator. I'll have to get my words right tonight. Here at New Rochelle High School, and we're here for an important piece of the college process, which is the financial aid process. And it is confusing and not confusing. I hope to sort of straighten out some questions you might have tonight about this process. The one thing I'll ask is that I want to go through the presentation and then I'll take questions at the end. All right, so let's get started. If I can work this thing. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about the FAFSA, which is the Federal Form for Financial Aid, which is where this whole process begins. We're also going to discuss New York State Aid, the CSS profile, and the New York State Excelsior Scholarship, and institutional and other scholarships. And again, as we go forward, I have more information on each area. So where does it all begin? It begins with the FAFSA form and the federal financial aid process. And there are certain definitions that go along with all of this. And can we hit the link for the video? That's it.
If you need help paying for college or career school, the Office of Federal Student Aid might be your best option. We offer more than $150 billion to students each year in the form of grants, loans, and work-study funds. And federal student aid can be used to pay for school expenses, such as tuition, room and board, and books and supplies. After you've filled out the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, you'll receive an award letter from each school you list under FAFSA. This letter explains both the federal and non-federal financial aid options that a school is offering you. So let's talk about federal aid. If you qualify for and receive a federal grant, you won't have to repay the money. That will definitely help offset the cost of school, but you may still need additional help. If so, a federal student loan might be your answer. Remember, a student loan is just like any other loan. It's borrowed money that will have to be repaid with interest. If you plan to take out a loan, consider federal student loans first. Compared to private student loans, federal student loans often have lower fixed interest rates and offer many benefits that you won't find otherwise. For example, when it's time for you to repay your federal student loan, your loan servicer can work with you to find the best repayment plan for your individual needs. Plus, you may be able to adjust your loan payments based on your income. You also may be able to defer your federal loan payments, deduct student loan interest on your taxes, and even consolidate your eligible federal student loans into one loan with one monthly payment. Federal loans can even be forgiven based on certain types of employment. Getting a work-study job is another great option to help pay for school. Eligible undergraduate and graduate students will be able to earn at least minimum wage. If you have questions or need assistance, you can contact the financial aid office at your college or career school or visit studentaid.gov for more information.
Thank you. So one of the pieces I want to reiterate about this is what the grants are money you don't have to pay back. And that often becomes from the FAFSA and from schools themselves. So who is eligible for this? The eligibility is any citizen or non-citizen, and that's the student. We're talking about the student here who has a social security number. Unfortunately, for our families that the students don't have a social security number, there's not a whole lot we can do about the financial aid process. But if the student has a social security number, but the parents do not, the student is still eligible for financial aid. And these are the pieces that you're going to put together when you start your form. So next we're going to talk about some of the definitions. So financial aid is determined by, from the get-go, the federal government and the FAFSA. And you may have heard that they changed the entire process last year. And you may have heard from other parents who had students last year that it was a bit of a disaster. Not gonna lie. The government had not beta tested the form. There were lots of problems. So far, good news for you guys. So far, I have not heard any problems with the forms or with submissions. So we're praying and hoping that it all goes well this year. So one of the things they changed in this new form was some of the definitions that they used. So the first definition we're going to talk about is the SAI, which is the Student Aid Index. That is the number that once you submit your FAFSA and you submit all of the documents they want, they come back with you from the federal government through the FAFSA process. They will come back with a number that says, this is what we think you need to send your kid to college. This is how much money we can give you, or the percentage. But the COA, which is cost of attendance, as those of you who are going through the process may know, can be very different from college to college. So the way they figured is the cost of attendance minus the SAI, which equals how much financial aid your family needs. Now, one of the things I want to mention about cost of attendance, different schools are vastly different in their costs. And it's something that I talk about with students a lot, is the difference between public, New York State public schools, out-of-state public schools, and private schools. And the biggest difference between the three of those is the price tag. So for example, in New York State, we have both SUNY and CUNY, State of New York and City of New York schools. They are the best affordability. Their cost of attendance is under $10,000 a year, typically, for tuition and books and fees, not counting housing. The out-of-state states, like what I always call the big rah-rah schools, like a University of Maryland, a University of Michigan, a University of Delaware, those schools are more for our students because they don't come from that individual state. And those schools are going to be in the $40,000 to $50,000 range per year. And then you have the private schools. And they can range upwards of $70,000 to $80,000 a year all in. So one of the considerations in this process is what is that real cost of attendance? Because the federal money is still going to be the same. It's not going to change. So here's just some examples of the amounts from last year. And I'm not sure if they're raising some of the totals this year, but we'll know that as we go forward. So last year, a Pell Grant, which were students who are at the lowest ends of the financial scale for the government, which typically means that the family has an income of under $75,000 per year, would get about $73.95. We then have work study, which in that little video explained, your student can get a job on campus that will pay the minimum wage to pay for various expenses. Then there is also direct, subsidized, and unsubsidized loans that your student can take. And then there are Parent Plus loans, which parents can take. And we're going to get into other pieces of this later on. The other piece that's important in this process is sort of getting an idea of how much it's going to cost. So there are calculators on the websites that will talk about how much you probably can expect from the government. And one is on the FAFSA website, which is the aid estimator. But what I'd like to show you, and can we click on the Iona College price net calculator? So colleges are now required to have what's called a net price calculator on their websites. So if you go to the financial page of a particular college, you look for their net price calculator and you can get an idea about what you might have to pay at that particular college. And it's a helpful tool just in terms of the entire process and knowing how to advise your student. One thing I forgot to say before, because I saw somebody take a picture, I will be posting this on the high school website under the counselor tab so that you will have the links and everything to look at later on. All right, we can close this tab. So it really depends on your particular circumstances, and we're going to get into the specifics as we go along in this PowerPoint. This is more the overview of the price and the financial aid situation and process. The other pot of money that we have available to us is New York State financial aid, which is TAP and Excelsior and various other programs in New York State, which I will get to in the specifics later in the program. So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here now. How do we apply? So the first step is your FSA ID. Can we click the first link? So this is the screen. Just leave it here. This is the screen. Your student and parent contributors, and we'll talk about that in a moment, all need an FSA ID. It is essentially a login and password for the FAFSA process. But, and I get these questions from students all the time, the student needs it, and the parent contributors need it. Whoever is in the household and is contributing to the student's support. Okay, we can close that tab. No, keep it back there. Okay. So we tell you don't share your login password. Remember, this is your financial information. And although I know one of the things people do is either the student does it for their parents or the parents do it for their kids. Obviously, if it's within your family, that's what you're gonna need. You're gonna all do it together. I usually suggest that you take a weekend, everybody in the family sit down, student and parent contributors, and do it all together. Because there are gonna be questions each of you are going to have. So this is the complicated piece for many families. And we did give a handout that says parent contributor. You may want to look, because I knew it didn't come up on my screen all that well. And the first thing I'm going to say about parent contributors, every family is going to be different. And everybody's going to have their own issues about who the parent contributor is. It used to be a bit more straightforward. The government now is looking for anybody who supports that student. So I'm going to go summarize briefly, but that is why I gave you the handout to take home with you, because you're going to have your own questions with this. Plus, I put the link on the PowerPoint, so when you're doing your FAFSA, and it is all over the FAFSA pages who are parent contributors, you can go to those links and sort of figure out your own family situation. So if you're a married couple with two parents, everybody has social security numbers, and your student has a social security number, that's probably the easiest situation. You all get an FSA ID, you all send in your login and password, and the only caveat to this is that whether or not you file your taxes jointly or separately. If you file them jointly, then only one parent needs to input information. If you file them separately, both parents will need to put in information. So the second category, which is whether you are unmarried and living together, divorced, but both contribute to the parents, to the students' support. Again, both parents will need to take an FSA ID, put in FAFSA information, whether you live in the household or not. If you contribute to that student's support, you will need to actually fill out the FAFSA and have an FSA ID. Then the last column is the most complicated. When there are different situations for families, when families are divorced or unmarried, and possibly one parent is no longer in the picture, doesn't support the student. Again, it's hard to get into the specifics for each individual family, but the bottom line, what they're looking for is essentially who is contributing to this student support. So if you have a parent who is no longer in the picture and does not support the student at all, it's going to be very difficult, obviously, for you to put in that information. And you're just not going to be able to. But, and this is a strong caveat, if there is child support in any way, shape, or form, that does need to be recorded. Because, as we get into more of the specifics, everything gets connected to your taxes. So whatever shows up on your taxes, on your tax returns, is going to show up in your FAFSA. And I'll take some general questions about this at the end, but if it's a specific question about your family situation, I'm going to suggest you get in touch with me personally and we can talk about it. Okay, so what documents are needed to complete this form? Can we click filling out the FAFSA form? Okay. So, everybody's social security number in the student and the parent contributors. Tax returns. All right, so this is one of the little tricks of this. The tax returns are a 2-year look back. So for your student who is in 2025-2026 college year, you are going to be using your 2023 tax returns. Sometimes that gets a little confusing, but it is essentially, think 2 years back from the year they're starting college. They also, as I said just previously, want to know if there's any child support. You need to record that. You will also need to know the current balance in your savings and checking account, in your student's savings and checking account. Now, my mentor, who taught me a lot about financial aid, was an old-time counselor here, used to say to the audience, pay your bills first, then do your FAFSA. So you don't have that much in your bank account because it's on the day you fill it out. So they don't ask for as much information on this score as they used to. It used to be quite detailed. Now it's more relying on your tax returns, but he's not wrong. So pay your bills first, then do your FAFSA. So the new piece of this, which quite honestly I think is difficult, and is that they now want you to record the net worth of whether you have your own business or a family farm. Now, I don't think too many people in New Rochelle have a farm. I could be wrong. But I know a lot of people have their own business. At the time I did mine for my kids, I had a business. So I'm not sure how I would have figured that out. What I've been told, and again, this is all new since last year, is that you need to speak with your accountant if you have a business and give them from your business tax records, get an estimate of the net worth of your business. And again, this is a brand new, since last year, factor in this process. Now, none of this will need to be uploaded. This is just information you're going to need to complete the form. So if you want to see the FAFSA form before you start filling it out, there are links where you can sort of see a little example of it. I'm not going to click it on tonight. You can do it yourselves. But the other piece I'm going to tell you that I've seen mistakes in the past is that you must go to studentaid.gov. I've had students come to tell me that they did their FAFSA on the first link that came up on Google, and that's not always the proper website. It must be a .gov website. And the official one is studentaid.gov. So all along this process, there will be help from FAFSA to look at explanations. Okay. Can we click FAFSA.gov on the top? So this is, once you have your, everybody has their FSA ID, and you've got your documents together, this is where you start. And again, a common mistake I've seen is you think, oh, it's the 24-25 school year, right? No. Your student is going to be the 25-26 school year. That is their freshman year of college. That is the form you want to start, not the 24-25. So this is the home page that you should land on to begin the form. Now, we can close that. Stay here. So these are a couple of tips on this process. First of all, it used to be one big form, and anybody who did it with older students in the old form knows that the parent, you could see the parent section and you could see the student section. For whatever reason, the government decided that the student should have their own form and section, and the parents have their own forms and sections, meaning that you don't see them at the same time. So the student really needs to fill out their section first with their information, and then invite their parent contributors to fill out their section of the form. And you will not see their section, and they will not see your section. So that is why I often suggest, if it's okay with the parents, for everybody to do it together. Because this way you know that everybody's doing the right thing. And, you know, I did it for my kids back in the day. Often parents do. But it's a good idea that your students at least sit with you and know what's going on, because they are going to get the emails on their email if there's a problem. And you're going to get emails if there's a problem on your side. So that's the thing that's often difficult with students. We know our students don't always look at their emails. You must watch your emails for this, because if there is a problem, it's going to come back at you on email. And I've just added some other information here so that when you're looking at it on your own at home, this PowerPoint, you have the links and the information. Oops, go that way. Okay. So as I said, so everybody fills out their forms. And the other piece that I find tends to be a mistake, particularly on the students, they don't go all the way through all the screens, and they don't go to where they electronically sign the document and hit submit. So that's for the student after they fill in where the colleges are. For you, as the parent contributor, it's often right after you link your tax returns to the FAFSA. And by the way, you don't have a choice. You have to link your tax returns to the FAFSA. It gives you the option to say no, but then it says, well, if you say no, we can't submit your FAFSA. Not really sure why they gave a yes or no answer. I guess it's just the approval. If you're not willing to do that, then you can't apply for financial aid. That's really where this new form got to. So you watch your email, hopefully everything's filled out correctly, but on occasion, more than one, you will get emails back, both your student will get it and the parents will get it. By the way, do not use the same email for everybody. Parents need their own email, students need their own email. And students should not use their NRED Learn email. They should use a personal email. And hopefully it comes back okay, and if not, you'll hopefully correct the sections that you are mistaken. Go back into the form, you can go back in and make your corrections. Finally, it all goes well and it goes through and you get that SAI number. And it will tell you that on the dashboard for FAFSA. Next. Now, going into New York State, if your student is applying to schools in New York State, whether they are public or private, there are several different opportunities for students to receive money from New York. The first one is TAP, Tuition Assistance Program. Can we click on the HESC tab? This is what it looks like. Generally speaking, when you put in your address from New York State, the student does that, it will show a link, say, apply at the end, apply for TAP. Now, TAP will tell you to apply for them even if you haven't applied for FAFSA yet. But that's like putting the cart before the horse. TAP links to FAFSA. FAFSA must be submitted first, and you must have gotten that SAI number in order for TAP to generate. So you can set up the account, and that is not this whole everybody needs the same thing kind of thing. It's one account, the student's account for TAP, and it will link with the FAFSA based on Social Security numbers and background information. And then it will generate the TAP information if your student ends up getting accepted to any New York State school. So that could be a public school or a private school. But this is only good for New York State. Can we close that tab, please? Thank you. So, the next piece, which is something I talk about, but we can't even think about until April or May, is something called the Excelsior Scholarship. Again, this is only for New York State and only for SUNY or CUNY schools. So it's only for the public institutions in New York. So, for example, if your family makes under $125,000 per year, SUNY and CUNY tuition is approximately $7,000 to $8,000 per year. It could cover all of that tuition, the Excelsior Scholarship, but, and there is a big but with this scholarship. There are many caveats and conditions to this scholarship, and they include, the student must go to school for 4 straight years. They must stay in New York State after they graduate. They must not fail. But what happens is, if something happens that your student does not continue directly or transfers school or whatever, it does revert to almost no interest loan. So you do have to pay back the money they give you, but not really anything else. And so I suggest that if you are looking to accept an Excelsior Scholarship, that your student is accepting an Excelsior Scholarship, to really read all the conditions on the website for Excelsior, which is on the New York State HESC website, and really understand what all those conditions are, because there are many. On the other hand, you could end up paying no tuition. You still would have to pay room and board for any of the SUNY schools that are in New York State, but not that $7,000 or $8,000 in tuition. The other reason I sort of mention it but don't mention it is because New York State does not open up the application until April or May of your student's senior year. So you can't even begin to apply for it until then. But when I talk about the award letters, I'll explain what they do with that at the SUNYs and CUNYs. So I will send out an email whenever it comes out, because they seem to get later and later, when that Excelsior Scholarship is available. Again, it connects with the FAFSA and the TAP process. So if you've done those 2 pieces, it's really pretty easy to just click on apply for Excelsior. And the SUNY and CUNY schools will typically include it. So the other piece I like to discuss, which is something that a lot of people don't know about, is EOP and HEOP, Educational Opportunity Programs. This is again at New York State schools. EOP is at the SUNYs. HEOP are at selected private schools in New York State. And I'm just going to give you an overview of this, and you can certainly speak to your student's counselor about this. If your student has grades that are somewhat below, usually about 10 points below the mean average of a particular SUNY or CUNY school. So for example, if the mean average at Binghamton is a 93, they will look at students with an 85 for EOP. But the other factor in EOP and HEOP is economic. So New York State has a sliding scale depending on how many children are in your family, as to what the financial income of the family is to qualify for EOP. But if you are in that financial situation, they are wonderful programs, because many of the SUNY and CUNY schools will cover the cost that financial aid doesn't cover, and also give the student a great deal of academic support so that they can do well at a school they might not have been able to get into had they not applied for EOP and HEOP. And HEOP is at selected, and there's not a lot of them, but selected private schools in New York State. And once again, your student's counselor knows about these programs, and if you think that is something you all would be interested in for your students, speak to your student's counselor. Or you can speak to me as well about it. Finally, and we're not going to go into this that much, New York State will give funds for undocumented students, whereas the federal government will not. And it's called the Jose Peralta New York State Dream Act. That is for the undocumented student. They do it through the TAP website, and they basically, it's the same form, but you put in a lot more information because you're not going through the FAFSA. You're not connecting to that FAFSA. Okay, let's see. New York State. All right, and the next one. I will just take a drink of water. I will, before I go on to this. Okay. CSS profile. Can we click on the CSS profile link? Great. CSS profile is for students applying to the high-flying private schools. These are basically the Ivy League schools and those very expensive liberal arts colleges that are at the top end of the academic scale. Because what it does, it allows for the schools to consider institutional financial aid for students who either do or do not qualify for federal financial aid. And the CSS profile is through the College Board, and you do need to pay a fee for it. It's $25 for the first application and $16 for each college thereafter. And it is a much more extensive financial aid form than the FAFSA. It takes into account that we live in New York State and we pay some of the highest taxes and real estate costs in the country. It will take into account how many students, how many children you have in your family, which unfortunately, FAFSA is no longer taking into account how many students you have in college presently. It will take into account any medical debt that you have. It will take into account any other specific financial issues that you have in your family. To get a bigger picture of what the financial need is of that particular family. So I'll give the example of a student I have quite a number of years ago, from a very high-end student but there were 4 girls who were all fabulous students, all going to high-flying colleges, and she was panicking. The young lady was panicking because she wasn't getting any financial aid from any of the schools she was getting into, and she finally got into Harvard, and they basically gave her half tuition scholarship. They paid for entirely half of what she would have needed to pay out of their institutional funds because they wanted her as a student. So if your student is applying to a school that requests the CSS profile, I highly suggest I strongly suggest that you do it. Because even if you've done the FAFSA, you've done the TAP, and whatever else, if your student is applying to these schools, this could mean money even if you do not get federal financial aid. And that, it can really make a big difference in those very expensive schools. Can you close the link, please? So the $25 and then $16, this is on the College Board website. It's just an important part. And then scholarships. I thought I missed something, but I didn't. Okay, scholarships. So there are different ways of doing scholarships. Now, first of all, scholarships are not financial aid. Scholarships, they can have a financial component to it, but many scholarships given by the colleges are academic. They are based on your student's transcript. Often you will get the scholarship information, the academic scholarship information, with the acceptance letter. Not with the financial aid letter, but with the acceptance letter. And it is based on your student's application, on their transcript, and anything else that they have submitted. Many schools, most schools, will consider students for academic scholarships just based on their applications. But some schools will ask for further information, maybe an extra essay, maybe there is a major specific academic scholarship. That's something you should be looking at with your student in terms of the schools that they're very interested in. The other piece is that with those private schools particularly, if your student applies to a school where their GPA is high for that school, then there is a good chance they'll be able to get an academic scholarship, which might really cut that tuition down, because the institutional scholarship is the biggest chunk of money you're going to see. That is going to be the biggest piece you're going to be able to get. That can be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. So it really is worthwhile to look at each website and see what is offered. Then there are several search engines that are out there. And I'm on a few of them because I check them out to make sure that they are legitimate and they have legitimate scholarships. FastWeb was one of them. There was a flyer outside with a FastWeb piece. College Board has scholarships, scholarship.com. FAFSA website also has scholarships. Even though these are reliable websites and reliable search engines, you really have to do your due diligence. So I'll click on a link from FastWeb and I'll see something that asks only for basic demographics, social security, no essay, no recommendations, no nothing. I would be suspicious of those. I really would be suspicious of those. I also usually tell students, and I look myself, to click on the actual link for the actual organization that is giving the scholarship. You want to look at the organization, see if it's a legitimate organization, one that you might have heard of. Sometimes it's also a scholarship that the search engine has sent to you because of things you filled out on the search engine website, but really it could be, I've found a lot of law firms in the South and the Midwest give scholarships. They're not likely to give our student the scholarship, so you might want to pass those by. But there's a really good way of finding some very unique scholarships, because all of these search engines ask for specific information about the student, and that would be heritage, religion, Always the one that is the one that everybody mentions is left-handedness. There are scholarships for left-handed students. But there's also for disabilities, for background, heritage background. And so the more you put in, the more specific those search engines will be in sending scholarships to you. Then the last piece is your student's Naviance account. We are very lucky that in both New York State, Westchester, and in New Rochelle, we have many organizations that offer small scholarships to our students. So that could run $500, $1,000, a couple of $1,000s, but that adds up. And I post these scholarships on your students, on our Naviance website. It is under the colleges tab. It says local scholarships. I think actually now they changed it. I think it's favorite scholarships. But if you click around, you'll find them. And again, often the scholarships are very specific to the background or interests of this particular student. So you just have to scroll through them, see what works for your student. Again, they typically ask for an essay, for recommendations, for transcript. I do post some national ones in there. Typically, they become more active starting January, February, March. I usually suggest checking it every couple of weeks. I tend to try to update it this year once a week, but things sometimes get in the way. So hopefully at least every 2 weeks I update it. And they definitely become more active in February, March, and April, because a lot of the due dates for the scholarships tend to run in those months. So, and in terms of their recommendations and their transcripts, they can get that all from their counselors. So finally, how do we put this all together? How do you find out what money you really get? Oops, wrong way. Oh, I went that way. Okay. I am doing forward. It's the wrong way. Sorry. I've never used this thing before. There we go. Okay, now we're good. So, what happens at the end of all of this? Like we said, watch your emails. Just go back. I feel like I missed something. Okay, no, I didn't. Okay. Again, watch the emails for any questions from either the colleges or FAFSA or TAP to make sure everything has been submitted. Sometimes schools will individually ask you for more paperwork just because they want to see if there's more money they can give you. Maybe you don't quite meet that FAFSA income deadline level, but the school might, as we said, that institutional money. They may say, well, if I see more of your tax returns or more of your family's financial situation, and these would be the schools that do not do CSS, which most do not, they may ask for a few more pieces of information. And deadlines about FAFSA. Now, we've heard from our students that deadlines on the application process are very important. Some of them are hard deadlines, some of them are rolling. The financial aid deadlines by colleges are porous, is the best word I can use for it. They are not hard deadlines. Most schools, and I've honestly never heard of a school that has said, I won't accept financial aid documents after the deadline. Mostly what they're trying to do is get parents and students to get the information in by a certain date so that they can evaluate and send the packages. So if for whatever reason you see a deadline that you missed for the financial aid, not the application, but for the not for the college application for admission, but for the financial aid financial aid package, still submit. Always submit. Don't ever leave money on the table in this process. Submit everything that you can. So this is the piece that a lot of people don't realize. Every single school your child gets accepted to will send you a financial aid award letter. Now, this may be in the way of a physical letter, often not these days. It might be in a form of an email to your student. You're not going to get it. Sorry, parents, you will not get the award letter. It will be on the student portal for each individual college. Now, what is that portal? When your child applies to schools, typically once they've received the application for admission, not the financial aid application, they will send an email back to your student saying, "We got your application. We'd love you to log into our portal so that you can follow what we need and the information." Many students do not set up those portals, but they're a wealth of information. And often, that's where the financial aid package will be posted. Your student might get an email saying, "Your financial aid package is now posted on your portal." And often they go, "What portal?" That's what it is. Again, it is going to be each individual school they get accepted to, not the ones they've all applied to, only their acceptance will give them a financial aid package. And each package can be and often is different. Schools have different institutional funds. Schools look at the FAFSA differently. They will offer different loan advantages. They'll offer different student loans. They'll offer different Parent Plus loans. And again, all of this is going to be on the individual school portals. Pell Grants, which are the money from the federal government, typically are going to be about the same at every school. TAP is typically going to be the same at every school, but that's where it ends. So as I said, I would come back to the Excelsior Scholarship situation. What I have seen from the SUNYs and the CUNYs in their awards letters is often they will post an estimate of what the student should get from the Excelsior Scholarship based on the FAFSA and the TAP applications. That doesn't mean you need to accept it. You don't have to accept everything that is on the award letter. You don't have to accept the loans. You don't have to accept the student loans or the Parent Plus loans. You can go your own route. Again, my mentors used to say, if you can take a home equity loan on your home, that might be a better way than taking a Parent Plus loan. Not the student loan, but a Parent Plus loan. Again, you as a family have to evaluate that situation. So like I said, you then spread out all the award letters and see who gives you the best deal. It may not just be the SUNYs. I go back to my student who got into Harvard. In the end, her package was equal to paying for a SUNY. So it really, and they won't all come at the same time. Sometimes schools get their packages out very quickly, their aid packages, sometimes they don't. They do need to have them out by the end of April so that you can make that May 1st decision on what college your student is going for, because that's down payment deadline, typically. And now you may have heard last year that was a disaster. And this year we don't expect that. We expect it should go in the more normal route, that you should get the aid packages from the schools, that the schools should get the financial information from FAFSA, from TAP in a timely manner, and that families will get their reward letters in a timely manner. So again, the earlier you get it in, the better off you're going to be. And then you decide which is the best academic and financial situation for your family. So this is just websites that, when we post this, that you can look at on FAFSA to help with your information and anything you need to support you doing this process. And finally, there were forms outside. We're having a financial aid boot camp on January 30th. What this is we have an organization called Luca, where they bring in people who they've trained to help individual families through the FAFSA process. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by this process, or you're struggling with your family situation, and you'd rather sit down with somebody to do the process with somebody who might know better than you, then you can sign up for this. There's a link, there's a QR code on the form, and I put the link up here, and you can sign up for a time slot, for an hour time slot, and you come with all your documents, and you come with your student and with your parent contributors, and you do it sitting here. Now, the one thing I will tell you, going back to almost the beginning of this, is that if you choose to do it that way, and you come to the boot camp, everyone who is a contributor must have their FSA ID before they come in to do the boot camp. And one of the problems is that sometimes it takes a day, 2 days, sometimes a week, for FAFSA to approve the FSA ID, which is that initial login and password. So it just gums up the works if you want to do the entire form with the assistant, with the helper. So, I hope I haven't confused you too much tonight. I thank you for coming out on this cold night. I am happy to take some questions, but this is what I'm going to say, especially when it comes to parent contributors, and I'll reiterate, there's a lot of very specific situations for families. And if your question is a specific question to you, just get in touch with me at a later date, and I'll see what I can answer. But if it's a more general question, I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah?
The CSS, is there a particular timeline, time frame? I imagine we don't want to start applying for the CSS without knowing that
No, you do it at the same time. You do it as soon as you can.
So even though there's a fee per school,
Yes.
we don't know that the kid has been accepted to the school?
No, CSS you do
Once
with their admission.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great question, by the way. Yes.
Pat,
So, no, you don't have to download anything or upload anything. It connects automatically to the IRS when you click yes, connect my taxes. Yes, yes.
Question about the EOP. Does EOP apply to like CUNY schools?
Yes, CUNY schools actually have their form, which is called SEEK, S-E-E-K. And it's the same idea. The lady in the white and black sweater.
Could you talk a little bit more about the Parent Plus loan? How much are those usually about students?
So that is, so Parent Plus loans are sort of I'm trying to think the best way to say this. That's up to you. It's how much you choose to take. It's like any other loan. It's got interest rates. The interest rates tend to be a little bit lower than typical regular loans. But what happens is each school website, financial aid website on your student screen on there will, give you links to those things. Or banks will have them as well. But it's like taking any kind of loan. It's a normal loan. The student loans are different. They're lower interest, they're government backed, that sort of thing. Yes, this young lady. Yes.